Let's get into the big topic of open source, something that we actually say at Red Hat.
This is so awesome.
We are an open culture that believes in the importance of
What is that process that a developer, or let's say,
as the Kubernetes ecosystem really boomed?
Hello and welcome to this week's Ask an OpenShift Administrator Office Hours live stream. As always, that's a mouthful, and I am your host, Andrew Sullivan. I am joined by my lovely co-host, Mr. Johnny Rickard, if I could talk right today. Man.
What's up, man? Well, you got the intro right, at least.
Yeah, I've been practicing it in my head over and over and over, and sometimes my mouth just doesn't cooperate, This is episode 73, and, it's still a challenge some days. Still a challenge some days. It's I blame it on lack of caffeine or like too early in the day, but no, it's like 11 o'clock here on the East Coast. I got no excuse.
There's no rolling.
So I will say that 2+ years of being at home, sitting in the same chair, doing all that other stuff, and just generally being a not exactly exercising human. If I seem a little restless today, it's because my back is hurting a little bit. So it's got nothing to do with being uncomfortable or dissatisfied with our conversation here. It's all because I'm just not. I need to take better care of myself, as my wife reminds me daily.
Yeah, man. And the back having back problems kind of sucks.
Yeah, and I'm not getting any less gray. So
Chrome. It's Chrome.
Yeah. I'm going to start saying that now.
It's part of the Chrome package, man.
All right. Well, so this is one of the Office Hours live streams here on here on Red Hat live streaming. So Office Hours means that we are here to answer any and all questions that our audience happens to have. So anything that is on your mind about OpenShift, about how to use OpenShift, deploy OpenShift, manage OpenShift, I would say deploy applications, but I can't really, and Johnny, I don't know about you, I'm not too good at developing things. So yeah, we're happy to entertain those questions, but might not be able to help here on the stream. But don't hesitate to ask those questions. If we can, we will absolutely answer them here. If not, then we have a pretty vast, a strong array of resources here in the business unit and engineering and kind of across Red Hat to help get those questions answered. So Johnny's usually furiously typing into Slack during the streams, trying to reach out to folks and get answers. If we can't get those answers, then we'll follow up next week or in the blog post that goes out after each one of these streams. So that being said, again, don't hesitate to ask any questions that come to your mind. And if you are not watching us live, if you're watching the recording, you're welcome to send us a message. So you can send me an email, andrew.sullivan@redhat.com, or reach out on social media, Practical Andrew on all the various things, all one word. Or Johnny, Jonny, just like the name tag there in the stream at redhat.com. So today, our subject or the topic of our stream is to talk with our guests, Manuel and Rick, about their experiences with OpenShift. And this one, so Johnny and I chatted, it's been a little bit, Johnny, right? Mm-hmm. Probably, 6 weeks ago. And our thought process was we wanted to reach out to a bunch of our communities, right? So OpenShift Commons and the Red Hat accelerators and all of those folks, and basically say, hey, do you want to come talk about what it is that you do with OpenShift, how you use OpenShift, some of your experiences from using OpenShift? And our two guests, Rick and Manuel, were kind enough to, I'll say, volunteer as tributes, if you will, for joining us today. So I know we completely messed up the title for this one. I think we've been through like 4 iterations because Johnny and I both got confused because remember I just said we reached out to all of these communities at the same time. And so we actually thought that Rick was one of the accelerators. So apologies to the accelerators team. We do need to have Andy and that group on sometime in the near future, but Rick is not from the accelerators. So again, apologies for any confusion that happens to be there. All right, I'll stop rambling and I will ask Rick to introduce yourself if you don't mind.
Sure, happy to do so. I'm Rick.
I am a site reliability engineer. I currently do that at TomTom. Before that, I was working at Red Hat in Red Hat's OpenShift dedicated team for, I think, around about 2.5 years. Other than that, I am one of the authors of Operating OpenShift, together with Manuel.
All right, thank you. I didn't know that you were one of the authors. I should have known that. I think I have the.
I was going to call it out just a second ago. So they just released it. Yeah, I was going to say that we had a celebrity, or that we had some celebrities on our.
I have deploying to OpenShift. I don't have operating OpenShift. I was looking at.
Yeah, I think I still have that here as well.
Yeah. So yeah, thank you, Rick. I appreciate you joining, and congrats on the book. And then also joining us is Manuel. And I apologize to anyone and everyone. I am, as I was telling everybody before we started, I'm terrible at English. So me attempting to pronounce even like anybody's name, including my own, is often risky. So apologies for butchering any names.
Yeah, no worries. So my name is Manuel. I always tell people it's pronounced as in RTFM, so everybody gets it right. I'm working as a site reliability engineer at Red Hat, where we are essentially running OpenShift clusters, ROSA clusters for our customers.
Yeah, so you're both SREs, and for our audience, you remember that we had Hillary Lipsig, who is the host of the GitOps Guide to the Galaxy. So she is also an SRE, and we had a conversation around what that role is and kind of how it fits in with a number of different things a few weeks ago. We'll dig up the link for that eventually. But today we don't, while we're very happy, I think both of y'all are very happy to talk about SRE and what it means and that type of stuff. I think our goal here is really to talk about kind of what you all do and what that means to customers and some kind of, I think, key takeaways, some interesting stuff that they can learn from basically all of your hard work and experience in managing, Manuel, I think you said you were for OpenShift Direct, or OpenShift Direct.
Dedicated.
No, it's OpenShift dedicated and ROSA clusters that mainly that we're running.
Thank you.
OpenShift dedicated is on Amazon and on GCP, and ROSA is the joint cooperation with AWS.
Yeah,
but those clusters are also run by our team.
Yeah, Direct is something else. I've got too many TLAs, too many 3-letter acronyms floating around in my head. So basically, learning from all of the things that you all have learned over all of your experience. All right. Again, I'll stop my rambling. Apologies for anybody who's seeing all of the spam in the comments here. I know Stephanie's working hard to take care of that. So, Johnny, let's talk about some top of mind topics.
Yeah, man, let's do it.
So top of mind topics are things that we have identified over the last week or so, kind of since we had the last stream, or things that we have discovered, regardless of when they were published. Sometimes we're a little late, that we think might be interesting to you all, to our audience. So don't hesitate to ask any questions. We'll do our best to talk through a few different things. Let's see. What's this? So OpenShift Data Science, Johnny.
Yeah. So there's another, I don't want to call it subscription, but it's another service that Red Hat's providing called Red Hat Open Data Science. And it's to provide some of the tools for data scientists, so like Jupyter Notebooks, just a lot of the tooling that data scientists use. I thought I had a blog up here a second ago, but I've obviously done something with it. But, it's really just to enable some of these teams. And so actually I found it. So it's, there's Jupyter Notebooks that have TensorFlow, PyTorch. You can export your models and stuff like that from, across your platform. So, you can go and build your stuff out on the data science platform and then move it over to your cloud environment if you needed to. And it's starting to like really, gain some traction. So I saw it and I thought it'd be pretty cool to talk about, because I know that there's a lot of that. That's pretty much a mainstream conversation right now.
Yeah, I've actually had some experience with it. So one of my side projects right now is working on what we're calling the Open Hybrid Cloud demo. So it's a massive demo that'll be available to folks hopefully in the next few weeks. But we touch on using ODS, Open Data Science, OpenShift Data Science, and it's really cool in that if you're using ROSA or OSD, so OpenShift dedicated.
Mhm.
I think I got that one right this time. You can hook in and you can, yeah, thank you. So you can hook in, you have access to all of your data, right? You'll be able to do things like through the interface, and I've seen it, I've used it. You can go through and say, I need a Jupyter Hub instance that has X amount of CPU, X amount of RAM, etc., that has access to these resources. You can build your whole notebook, go through, build the models, and spit it out. The whole thing you can either integrate from your applications running in, say, Rosa, and have that model being executed in ODS, or you can export it out as a container image, basically, and then run it inside of your application infrastructure. So it's really cool. The talk track, the marketing stuff that they've got around it, or I should say the technical marketing, is really interesting in that it's meant to provide a convenient and easy way to decouple the data science team from the application team and control where those interactions happen or not, as the case may be. Sometimes they are going to be the same. But help build confidence, give the tools that are needed to do data science-y things. I will say that, and Andrew knows that Jupyter is not spelled like the planet; it's spelled with a Y, and that's 95% of what I know about doing data science. So, but yeah, I'm happy to see that one is finally opening up for more broad access, because that one's really cool.
Yeah, it is cool. It is cool. I see Burr and those guys doing the demos, on it all the time, and to see that it's now going mainstream and becoming a thing is pretty awesome.
Yeah. So a couple of questions in here. Where can we get the deploying or OpenShift book? Not deploying to OpenShift, but managing OpenShift.
So the book is available for pre-order, I think, most prominently probably on Amazon. It's also in early release on the O'Reilly platform if you have a O'Reilly Learning subscription. If you don't, then I think we actually have a code that's good for 30 days. Maybe we can share that later. So basically you get a 30-day free subscription with the O'Reilly platform, and then you can just read as much as is available as of right now.
Disclaimer, that's how Rick and I wrote it so far. So raw and unedited.
Raw and unedited, and we're also not really good at English. So that's really bad.
I it's been 8 years, I think, since I published, and I remember that process well. Editing is quote unquote fun, so I would say that I won't do it again, but that's not true. I would do it again, but I remember it being a big hassle.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah,
the overall thing, like it's interesting. I'm extremely grateful to this day that Manuel vouched for extending the time that we had to write the actual book. Like I was pitching it to Ray back then, and I was like, "Oh yeah, that's gonna be fine. We got to be done in 6 months." Mata was like, "I know, maybe not." So I'm like really happy. But
it's funny. I always thought, I've been a corporate person basically my whole career, right? And we always used Microsoft Office products until I came to Red Hat. I thought I was good with Microsoft Word until I went through that publishing process. I learned more from those editors in like that, I think it was 6 months that we were involved. I learned more about Microsoft Word from those editors than I have ever learned since before or since. Anyways, let's see. What other questions have we got here? William, what's the best way for a junior Linux engineer to get started with OpenShift in a lab environment? So there's a couple of ways that I always recommend. Let me share my screen. Let's see. I want this guy. So the first resource that I always recommend to folks is to go to learn.openshift.com, which will redirect you over to developers. And if we scroll down through here, you can see that there's all kinds of learning paths and all kinds of other information here to get you started with sort of whatever it is that you're interested in with regard to OpenShift. And as we scroll down here to get to this interactive lessons, so down here in the interactive lessons, you have a bunch of different options that will literally drop you into like a real running OpenShift environment. So if I scroll over here, right, there's a whole bunch of these. And so here's the OpenShift 4.10 playground. If I hit the start button, and then I can scroll down and I click this launch button, and you see it takes it a little bit to provision the environment. But basically at the end of that, I'm in a real cluster. You saw I did nothing. I haven't registered. I haven't logged in. I don't think I'm logged in here. But I get dropped into a real OpenShift environment. You can use all of those instructor things in order to get started. But it's, in my opinion, the fastest way to get started as an administrator. I would also suggest, if you search for Red Hat DO080, so there is a training course, Deploying Containerized Applications. So this course is free. It's there's no cost to it. It gets you started on, and I think I've highlighted this before. I am 99.99% positive it is not based on OCP 4.1. But it's a free course. You can go in here, you can get started. Teaches you a bunch of different stuff about how to get started with OpenShift, kind of an overview and a high-level introduction. And then from there, you can choose to go in and do things like the DO 180 course and so on and so forth if you have Red Hat Learning. And then last but not least is try.openshift.com. So try.openshift.com takes you into this landing page where you can have access to a number of additional resources. So first is Developer Sandbox. So Developer Sandbox will give you access to a longer term instance of OpenShift. I think it lasts for 30 days. But it's a single namespace, and inside of there, right, you can do a subset of things. It's really geared towards folks who want to do like operator development and stuff like that and get started. You can see down here, made for developers. Managed services, of course, which I know our guest today can talk at length about, but basically connect your AWS, Azure, etc. account, and then you can go in and click the button and you'll have access to an OpenShift instance. Self-managed, this is kind of the traditional way that most people get. One thing I will point out with self-managed, if you have a developer account, so if you just go to developers.redhat.com, you register for an account, that developer account includes not only 16 RHEL licenses, 16 RHEL entitlements, but also 16 nodes of OpenShift. And that is, they're single user only, non-production, right? They're self-supported. There's no support from Red Hat, but you can absolutely get started completely for free using that self-managed deployment type. So, and that there is a 60-day trial, but if you're using a developer entitlement, then it kind of continues on from there. It doesn't just end at the trial. You can keep that cluster running. But again, single user only, non-production use cases. Johnny, did you have any other, or anybody else?
I was going to add. So Khalid kind of is alluding to it, but I was going to say you could also in your lab environment install CRC if you just wanted like a single node OpenShift environment. It's developer only. So like you can't really. You can't put production workloads on it, and it's limited in some of the APIs that are on there, but it's still a very real experience with OpenShift. Yeah. And then additionally, you could also use the single node OpenShift installer to have something just a nice single node, full API'd OpenShift deployment that you could go and kick the tires against, and essentially just take some of the CKA and CKD or CKAD, tutorials that are out there and some of the OpenShift tutorials that you can find online and just start trying to apply them in your OpenShift cluster.
Yeah. Yeah. And the BAMF podcast folks just pointed out that you're behind. I'm taking away your marketing title, Johnny.
Oh, man.
Code Ready Containers was rebranded OpenShift Local. That was back at Summit, I think.
Names are hard.
I know. Let's see. I thought there was one more. Book Code Ready Workspaces. Yeah, can you give a brief about Code Ready Workspaces from Khalid? So yeah, Code Ready Workspaces or OpenShift Local is it's a lot like Minishift from the days of yore, right? It uses your laptop, desktop, whatever, and it deploys a virtual machine, and then in that virtual machine is a very small instance of OpenShift. So. All right, I'll quit rattling on. Go ahead.
Yep, just real quick. So one thing is, if you look in the video description on YouTube, you should see the link to the learn.openshift.com stuff. So that way, just check that out, and you should find the link there.
Yeah. Oh, Khalid said, don't forget about Microshift. So I don't usually lump Microshift in because Microshift is essentially only the OpenShift API. So you're taking a RHEL node or something like that, and then you're deploying via Podman the OpenShift API, but none of the other pieces of OpenShift are there. So there's no operator lifecycle manager. There's none of the other, OpenShift features and functions inside of there. So it's good if you're a developer or an application team and you want to test, specific things, but especially if you're an admin, right? It's not reflective of a quote unquote real cluster. Relvus, any idea when it goes to M1? I don't. There has been some mention. I've seen some chatter about it, but I need to catch up on that. You would think that I would know more because I use an M1 Mac, but I have a virtual machine that I deploy everything to, an x86 virtual machine that I use. So I don't know. Yeah, Jamie, Microshift it's not just more for edge, it's targeted at edge, specifically IoT devices.
Yeah, and Khalid, I don't have any experience with dev spaces, but what I'll do is I'll look into this, and then I'll try and do something next week when we kick off, so that way at least give like a little synopsis of what it's all about.
So in the interest of time, I just wanted to hit on one other of our top of mind topics here. So Service Mesh 2.2 was released. So do I have this up here? Here we go. Service Mesh 2.2. We'll take the other links. We'll drop. There's one other link that I just showed here briefly. I'll drop that, or Stephanie, if you would please drop that into the chat, so that way anybody who is interested in the ROSA authentication, STS authentication experience. But anyways, so Service Mesh 2.2 was released. Lots of stuff happening inside of here. Our plan is to reach out to Ortwin again, see if he's willing to join us and talk about a lot of the stuff that's going on inside of here. Andrew fully admits that I am not very familiar with Service Mesh, so we definitely want to bring in a subject matter expert on that to be able to talk about it.
Yeah, the cool part about this for me was that like we're really close to like the actual current release of Istio, right? So like 1.14, I think is the latest, and with the Service Mesh, we're going to be at 1.12. So we used to be pretty far behind on what was upstream. So I think it's awesome that we're actually keeping up with the community Istio on this.
Yeah, I haven't seen Our Hope 9 in chat today. Usually he's the one who's I know he's a Service Mesh user, so he's usually asking us about it. All right, so running a little bit behind on our time today. I hope that's okay. But today's topic. So as we mentioned at the top of the show, today we really wanted to talk with a couple of folks who are OpenShift administrators, right? And I think what's really cool here is, a long time ago, when was it? Who did we have? We had, I think it was Mark Curry on. And Mark was saying that we're seeing this kind of macro level trend away from a small number of very large clusters to a larger number of smaller clusters being deployed kind of across the entire OpenShift customer base, which is not to say that you're wrong or bad if you're not doing that. It's just becoming more common. And so I think, having practicing SREs, having folks who are, day to day, and both of you folks are, I can only imagine hundreds, if not thousands of clusters that you're responsible for. That's really your bread and butter. So I thought it was really cool that we had the opportunity to talk with you and, really have a conversation around some of the challenges that you see, maybe how you've solved some of those challenges and that type of stuff. So without further ado, let's talk about that.
Yeah, sure. So one of the reasons we actually wrote that book was because the question came up more often from customers or people outside the organization. How are you doing that? How are you running those clusters for your customers? And what can we learn from that for our organization so we can effectively run multiple OpenShift clusters as well? And then I guess one day Rick came and said, hey, why don't we write a book about that and publish that? And yeah, there we go, right? So things that always come up with operating multiple clusters is obviously, as you said, when you get more and more clusters, more smaller clusters, that you want to automate the lifecycle of your cluster. So when you need another cluster, you don't want to call someone or send a message to someone or open a ticket. So someone goes and types a bunch of commands, so you get a new cluster probably a day later, but you really need to automate that whole lifecycling. So setting up a new cluster and tearing it down is just a self-service using a CLI or using a web UI or whatever.
Yeah, I used to call it ticket-driven operations, right? When I was a VM admin a long time ago, or even a storage admin, especially storage admins for some reason, your activities are driven by help desk tickets, right? I need a new LUN that's 1 terabyte in size, and so they submit a ticket, and usually the first action after you get that as a storage admin is to go back and say, no, I'm not giving you whatever capacity you asked for. I'm giving you 1/4 of that, and then argue about it for a week or two and go from there. So I think maybe this is Andrew being a little bit presumptuous, but I think some of the tools that we see now are, and some of the features of OpenShift are really things that have come out of what the SRE teams have been doing. So I want to say that there's been some, like Hive. Hive is, I think, one of those that was used for a while, that is now incorporated into ACM as the deployment engine there. So to your point of using a CLI, right, with Hive, a cluster is just a set of YAML.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not sure. I haven't ever tried setting up Hive myself to manage clusters. But yeah, it's basically you create a cluster that is used to manage other clusters. So you, using OC apply, you create a new cluster, and that's then stand up somewhere in a different AWS account or GCP account or whatever. Mm-hmm. So that's one way to automate the cluster lifecycle.
I think what's really cool though is that basically what you mentioned, right? So some of the tooling that is available now has learnings from the SRE team in it, and actually, to be honest, pretty much every OCP cluster has learnings from OSD in it, right? So how do I phrase that right now as not being there anymore? Tenses are hard and English is harder. So the dedicated team is always trying to pipe their learnings back into OpenShift itself, and keep a tight feedback loop, right? And always treat itself basically as customer zero. And so whatever issue those teams hit or the learnings that they have, the edges where it's like, hey, this and that could be done better, that's always going right back to OCP, and every other customer can basically benefit from that.
Yeah, the whole dog fooding method, right? Like just go out and eat your own dog food. Yeah.
And Dedicated was the first of the managed offerings, if I remember correctly. Or maybe I'm thinking, no, what was the one? There was an OpenShift 3 based one.
Yeah, that was Dedicated. So there was Dedicated v3, but that was also based on OpenShift v3, right? So the whole Ansible based stuffy, and then it kind of phased over to OpenShift 4, and so the team kind of had to revamp all the tooling and rethink. But it was also a big opportunity, to be honest, right? Because before that, you had to use Ansible. Like there was no real other way to do that more programmatic. And so with OpenShift 4, it was just a new opportunity, and that's where Hive came into play, and all the things. And then I think the next thing that came up was then Arrow, so Azure, Red Hat, OpenShift, and then the latest and greatest is Red Hat OpenShift service on AWS, an acronym in an acronym.
Yes, always.
And OSD works. It's AWS and GCP are the two platforms for that one. Banff. Dog food is not tasty. It's drink your own champagne, Johnny.
Oh, my bad.
Isn't Hive for hibernation? So Hive is, and we can look at, is my screen still shared? So if we go to github.com/OpenShift, and if we come down here and search for Hive, we've got Hive inside of here. And I think, I don't know if it's a function of Hive, but it's definitely a function of ACM where you can hibernate clusters. But really the goal of Hive is to provide an operator that, and the CRDs associated with it, in order to deploy clusters programmatically. So if we come down here to, I guess you can do cluster hibernation. So if we come down here to using Hive, and we want to do like cluster deployment, So see, effectively, once you get down here, so you've defined what your, what version of OpenShift you want to use, what's the pull secret, what's the private key to use, or excuse me, here's the pull secret. So this is the install config reference. So basically you feed it, here's all the metadata that you need in order to do an OpenShift install, kind of like you would doing OpenShift install from the command line, and you tell it to go. And it literally kicks off an OpenShift cluster deployment from inside of there. So, and this is, as you can see, it's YAML. So you can take this cluster deployment object and submit it against the API and create as many clusters as you need on demand. So very much in line with what I think it was you were saying a moment ago, Rick, of deploying by hand. Having an administrator have to go in and create a help desk ticket or something like that is not ideal at any sort of scale. I say that at any sort of scale, like I use this regularly inside of my own lab because I'm deploying clusters, sometimes 10 a week. And honestly, opening up a terminal and going through the whole process of, for me, it's always, I don't know why after, I've been doing this for 4 years almost. How long has OpenShift 4 been out? 3 years, 3.5 years. I've never taken the time to automate like pulling down my own pull secret. So I always have to go and log in to console.redhat.com and then browse and click the copy pull secret. And then I paste it into the console and all that other stuff. This is just, it's one of those things that makes life a little bit easier for me.
Mm-hmm.
And ACM is getting better and better all the time too. Yeah.
ACM is awesome.
So
yeah, slowly getting there. I think Hive was a significant step forward, right? And so that's kind of one of the things that came out of OSD and related teams, basically, right? Because that's how initially clusters were created for dedicated.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think the next iteration that I'm extremely excited for is actually HyperShift. That hopefully, and in my mind at least, is going to make herding clusters even easier, right? Because you basically have multi-tenancy, but at the same time you still have that central place to manage the problematic parts, right? So with Hive, you basically herd a lot of clusters, and their base state, so to say, is on your Hive cluster, but you can still break each individual cluster to a point where it's potentially unfixable. And so with HyperShift, I think what's really cool is that you only have workload clusters, and then your main, where all the critical parts are. So I think that's for me the next great thing that's coming that I'm extremely excited for.
Yeah, I know the Cloud Multiplier live stream, they showed HyperShift about a month ago, which is in tech preview with ACM 2.5 and OpenShift 4.10. But the really cool thing there is, like, to your point, you're so what's the official name for it? Gosh, we just talked about this. Hosted control planes. So yeah, you're deploying the control plane for a cluster as pods in a different cluster. And the really cool things that I've seen about it are how dramatically faster it is to deploy clusters. Because you're not having to wait for some virtual machines or something, physical servers to deploy CoreOS and then, Bootstrap and then, pull ignition and deploy a bunch of things and all this other stuff. Instead, you're deploying pods. And like I've seen, or I've heard rumor, I should say, that cluster deploy times like single minutes, single digit number of minutes in some instances. So that's really cool to me.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So I'm looking at our notes here. So there's a couple of things. So automating cluster lifecycle, I think we've largely talked about that through various tools at this point. So whether it's using upstream open source things like Hive, as well as a multi-cluster engine, which isn't upstream nor open source. It's now a part of, I guess it is open source, but it's not upstream. So multi-cluster engine is the productization of Hive that is used by ACM. And with ACM 2.5, it's now decoupled. So we talked about that last week with Jimmy a little bit. I really want to talk about or show that in some future episode. because there's a bunch of cool stuff you can do there. But that works for both creating and destroying clusters. Scaling clusters. It's not a cluster API model. It's still the machine API model. So scaling clusters is done from within the cluster, the child cluster, rather than from the parent cluster. So configuration management, and I think I saw Christian here a minute ago. So configuration management for clusters, to me, always screams GitOps. In mid 2022, that just seems to be the most commonly used way, as well as arguably the most powerful. I see G. Kumar's comment there at the top about using Ansible playbooks. That's certainly possible, but again, it seems like GitOps is winning that, winning hearts and minds, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so when it comes to configuration management, actually Hive has also a feature for that. So you can also use Hive to deploy configuration to your child clusters. It's called a sync set or a selector sync set. And the problem that's trying to solve is when you're creating new clusters, you certainly want to have a certain set of configuration on all those clusters, be it an IDP on how people log into those clusters or whatever they all have in common that you don't want to configure on each and every cluster. And you also want to be able to roll out updates to that configuration to all your clusters or to a selection of the clusters. And that's what those sync sets basically do. So they are, again, a CR that you can also apply to the Hive cluster, and then that configuration or the embedded object will be applied to the child cluster of Hive or to that managed cluster. In addition to Hive, if you don't use Hive to run or automate your clusters, you can also use, I think it's called OpenShift GitOps. Under the hood, it's Argo CD that you can just deploy as an operator on your OpenShift cluster. And there you can, as you said, in a GitOps way, you tell it where your repository is with the configuration, and then it applies everything that's in there from a certain branch to the cluster itself, or even to other clusters that you import and manage from the cluster. So you can again have a management cluster where you manage all your configuration of all the different clusters that you need to maintain.
Yeah, it's something, and we've been talking about bringing Christian onto the stream. So maybe we should actually, Johnny, maybe we should actually coordinate that. Because I think one of the interesting things is, as you pointed out, Hive has this ability. ACM has this ability. ACM now supports application sets, as well as through their governance policies, you can say, I want specific configuration to be pushed down and applied to clusters. And then, of course, Argo CD and OpenShift GitOps have the capability. So to me, it would be interesting to understand maybe some of the differences between them and when one is more appropriate versus the other. I think it's probably based on, which each one of them, or there's some overlap, but each one of them also has a significant amount of independent value proposition. So that'll be an interesting conversation to have at some point. But I do like that. I think we oftentimes associate GitOps and Argo CD with applications. And it's good to have a reminder that it's not just for applications. It works with kind of any YAML object, right? Any OpenShift, any Kubernetes thing. So if you want to have configuration for authentication, authorization, for configuring a machine set a specific way, or whatever that happens to be, all of that can be controlled through that same mechanism.
Yeah, I hate to say it. It's kind of like Puppet back in the day, where it could be used for application deployment, but you can also use it to configure your systems and put your system in a state in the state that you need it to be in. I'm sorry, man. Go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to say that deploying an application in terms of OpenShift is also just applying some configuration. If you say a YAML file is a configuration, then deploying an application is also deploying configuration. So that can be part of that configuration that you apply to a cluster.
Yeah, it's funny because sometimes I think people get frustrated, especially folks who are new to OpenShift and the CoreOS and machine config operator paradigm. They get frustrated because, well, why can't I just SSH to the node and change some config and do this type of stuff? And I think this is one of those times where scalability matters. And if everything is YAML and everything is configured through the Kubernetes API, then using all of these different tools, ACM, GitOps, Argo CD, all of these different things give us that ability to scale out as an individual.
So, Manuel, is your team, or do you use a combination of tools? Like, I mean, I know that's a stupid question, but like, do you use like a bunch of Ansible and a bunch of Argo, or do you use like mainly Argo, or do you use like what kind of tooling are you guys using to essentially do your job? And same thing, the same question to you, Rick. I mean, like, what are you guys doing? Is it kind of just a hodgepodge of tooling, or do y'all have like your primary go-tos?
So there's it's a combination of different tools. We currently don't use Argo CD to manage configuration. We use mostly Hive for most of the clusters, but it's it depends a bit. And for some things that we need to run or automate inside the cluster, we also developed a bunch of operators, which are also involved in lifecycle management. If you think creating, as a customer, you want to create a new cluster on AWS, someone needs to create and configure that AWS account if you don't want to bring your own. So there's also operator development. So there's an operator running on those clusters as well that cares for creating GCP or AWS accounts and stuff like that.
I think that was actually the first thing that we built together, right? GCP project operator.
Yep.
That was fun. Yeah, for me, I mean, things kind of changed, right? So at TomTom currently, I think the majority of stuff is Terraform, and then that is checked into GitHub, and then that is corresponding then applied via GitHub Actions, or what's that proprietary Microsoft thingy? Microsoft DevOps.
Azure
pipelines.
DevOps, yeah.
Azure the thingy, right?
Yep.
Because we obviously have like it's not the same level of openness as in Red Hat, right? So we have to have self-hosted runners that then are able to connect to our other infrastructure. So that's kind of the majority of stuff.
It's an area that I will admit that I don't have a lot of knowledge on, and that sounds really cool, of using runners in order to go out and apply configuration across various clusters.
I mean, it's got pros and cons, right? So I think the biggest con was using something like Terraform, that is like infrastructure as code, what you would go by, right? Is that it's only applied if you run Terraform, right? So and so there's a much bigger chance for having configuration drift as opposed to something like Hive, where it's a given Kubernetes resource that has like a desired state, and then our controller checks the state and then adjusts accordingly, right? So the likeliness for having configuration drift is significantly lower than if you run, especially not that active infrastructure. So basically infrastructure that works. You kind of apply changes to your infrastructure like once a day or every 2 days, and like half the world could have changed in that time.
I feel like the same is probably true of using Ansible and playbooks to do that type of management, in that it has to be constantly triggered in order to go out and remediate configuration, as opposed to, other options that are, yes, it's still desired state, but like GitOps, where it's constantly validating that configuration and ensuring that it matches.
Yeah, you essentially have to have it set up on a cron to make sure that it hasn't changed. And then the thing with Terraform, like I found, is that as long as you're putting your state out in like the cloud, like an S3 or something like that, then it's a little bit easier to manage the state, but you still have to stay on top of it. It's either a cron to go out every hour or whatever it is to keep that drift under control, because it will get out of control.
So a couple of questions here. Palani, what is the storage option most customers use? So I'll say from my perspective, it's all over the map. So OpenShift Data Foundation, ODF, the artist formerly known as OpenShift Container Storage, or OCS, is certainly out there as the, and I will say prominent and popular as a hosted storage option or an in-cluster storage option. But whether or not it's the most prevalent or the most commonly used one, I doubt it. Most customers have some sort of existing storage device, a Dell EMC, a Hitachi, Fujitsu, NetApp, whatever. And they want to take advantage of that. So they'll use whatever integration comes from those particular storage vendors. So I don't know that there is any one that has, more than, probably the equivalent of its industry share. If Dell EMC is, I don't know what the storage market breakup is anymore, but let's say they're 30% of the market, we'll probably see about 30% of customers using that. If NetApp is 20%, we'll see about 20% of clusters with that type of thing. That would be my guess, but I don't know that we actually have that data.
And then there's another question for the guys. What tools do you guys use for storing your secrets in Git?
What if that's a secret itself?
Please divulge.
No, I mean, like for now, we're heavy users of Vault, so it's not storing secrets in Git. Like it's just always integrated with Vault, and then on demand, basically injecting during build from Vault.
Okay, so are y'all using like the Vault agent within your pods to do the injection?
No.
I was gonna say I hope they're not actually stored in Git. But
there's use cases and use cases, right? So Git crypt, I think, right? So if it's a quote unquote secret that is actually not really a secret, and you just kind of want to have something to obfuscate it so people don't scrape it off the internet, fine, put it in Git, whatever, right? But like there's other really, really cool options. Like I think so.
Oh yeah, because you have like SOPs where you can actually store the GPG sign thing out in Git, and then just decrypt it on the way back. The only problem, I think, I can't. Somebody was telling me about this, or maybe I read it somewhere. But the issue is if you lose that key, like you've pretty much lost that secret. Like you're toast. And then I can't remember I think external secrets also works kind of in a similar way where it'll store the encrypted value out in Git, and then you just pull it down and decrypt it with the sealed secrets. We use a combination of like Vault and external secret. So like we'll use Vault to store the key or to store the secret, and then we'll use external secrets operator to essentially present it back to the pod. And that's pretty fancy because it can take almost any backend. So if you have like a key store that's out in Amazon, or if you're using Vault, or if you're using something else or whatever, the external secret interface doesn't really change to your deployments. So I think that's pretty rad.
That's actually pretty sweet.
What about you guys, Manuel? Is it like, are y'all pretty much like don't do anything in Git, or you're on your own?
No, we don't store secrets in Git, so
Gotcha.
It's pretty much the same. We also get it from an external service.
Right on. There's a question earlier, and let me ask. Okay, so, and I'm not sure if you guys are the right ones for this, but I'm just going to ask it anyway. So the question came from Relvis about how do we add multiple wildcards to a SAN in OpenShift 4? So say if it sounds like the cluster already exists, I want to add some more wildcards into my cert. So how would I do that?
I don't have a good
this
answer
literally
for
may
that
not be the right.
I mean, if in doubt, did you try write an operator for it?
Right.
No,
Yeah. So for me, I think. I'm sorry. As soon as I asked that question, I was like, it probably wasn't the right question for y'all. So I didn't mean to set you up like that. But yeah, I think for me, it's like just updating the cluster cert with the SANs that you want in it, and then just reapplying it. I don't know, Andrew. What do you think about that? Is that how you do it, or?
Yeah, I would assume that you'll need to regenerate the certificate,
Mhm.
adding in the new subject or SANs, and then redeploy the create the new certificate and then redeploy it into the cluster. I don't think there's any way that you can update it otherwise.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And then one of the other questions, and I think this might just be Andrew question here as well, but it's what are the critical foundations for OpenShift cluster deployments?
That's a good question. So I think if we're talking infrastructure side, so things like where it's being hosted at and all of that, is plan for accidental production. So in other words, OpenShift is really good at forcing you to do things where if you accidentally end up in production, you're still going to be mostly okay. So this is why we get a lot of complaints. I say a lot of complaints, but sometimes people will say, "Oh, OpenShift is really hard to deploy. You know, why do I have to do all this stuff? You know, with non-integrated or UPI, a load balancer, and blah blah blah, and this and that, and all these other things." And it's because, you know, one, it's scalable. We can go and we can do a bunch of things inside of there without having to completely either hack something together or redeploy the entire cluster. But yeah, so critical foundations for OpenShift and cluster deployments. So one, understand your applications and what their requirements are. That'll help with things like sizing and all of that. I understand and I completely sympathize with whenever you ask an application team, "Hey, what's your requirements?" They're going to say, "I don't know." Like, you know, it's like asking, you know, what's as a storage admin, like, well, what's your IOPS requirement? What's your latency requirement? Yes. You know, like they very rarely know. So in the absence of anything else, you know, plan for flexibility. You know, machine sets allow you to do things like dynamically scale up and down. You can resize nodes, all that other stuff. So yeah, I'm struggling to think of like critical foundations. Like OpenShift kind of sets you up for a lot of those things. Cluster deployments, again, pay attention to the documentation and the requirements that are there. Generally speaking, OpenShift won't let you shoot yourself in the foot. The deployment will fail if a lot of those things aren't present. I don't know. I'm curious about others' thoughts. I feel like I'm rambling.
Yeah, mine is just DNS. For the love of God, make sure DNS is good, because if you don't, it's going to be a hot mess disaster. Like,
and DHCP is still required if you're doing IPI or machine
and
sets.
DHCP.
Yeah.
Let's see. I'm trying to just make sure we capture all the questions. So another question from Polani was, do most customers use dynamic storage allocation?
I would think so. I don't know if Rick or Manuel, if you're able to, if you're aware of or able to share what happens in any of the clusters y'all manage, but I would suspect yes. I say that because manually provisioning PVs is not fun. I mean, yeah, you can automate that process as well and introduce them. It's harder to control though. Because if I using manual or automated provisioning, you know, if the application requests 100 gigabytes, they get 100 gigabyte PV. With static provisioning, or you know, whether it's through manual or automated processes, you know, if they request 100 gigabytes and you've got a bunch of 10 gigabyte PVs and a bunch of 500 gigabyte PVs, well, they're going to get a 500 gigabyte PV because that's the closest that is, you know, equal to or greater than their request. If you can hear my dogs, my apologies. So I would say the majority of instances it's going to be dynamic provisioning.
Yeah, because the static provisioning seems like the whole days of NFS, right? Where you have to stand up the actual device, and then you get that's cringe.
I'm a little ashamed I did that.
Hey, I think we
like
all. It's part of growing up on OpenShift, right?
Like I'm actively doing that for my home lab.
Oh yeah, goo.
Yeah, but labs are different.
It's really hard. Yeah. Well, I mean, I kind of I was starting off with a CRC cluster, and then I was like, oh man, I really don't want to do everything all over again all the time. I want to keep my metrics mostly, right, and see a pattern. And then it's like, how do I get persistence in my CRC cluster? That was a very interesting rabbit hole.
I'll also say that doing without CSI, you lose a lot of features, a lot of capabilities associated with storage. You can't do PV resizing, you can't do snapshots, you can't do clones, right? All that type of stuff all comes from the CSI provisioner. At the same time, I definitely get where having something, you know, a storage thing that is sophisticated and mature enough to provide all those features can be a challenge too, especially in a home lab. All right. Well, I'm trying to figure out what is going on with my dog. Can you create a custom SSL cert and upgrade ingress operator? Yes, you can. I would check out 2 weeks ago, Johnny showed the certificate operator, cert manager operator, which is one way to do that, but you can also do it manually, and it's just updating a CRD. Let's see. Yeah, I think Jamie linked you to the docs there. Tried to edit a node via YAML on OpenShift to change the CPU or memory, but VMware didn't detect. Yeah, so this is a functionality of the machine API operator and how it works. So once the node is deployed from its perspective, it's basically a static entity, right? It doesn't go back and remediate that configuration to match like the changed machine set. So you would need to deploy a new node, and it would then have that new configuration. But any existing nodes don't change.
So in a cloud world, like we just trash the machine. Is that how it works on VMware as well? Like, I mean, in on AWS or GCP, we basically just go ahead and then OC delete machine, and then machine API operator would tear down the existing machine and node, and then respectively spawn up a new one with the new configuration. Is that how it goes on VMware as well? I didn't touch VMware in a bit.
It was, if it was using the machine set, then yeah, you could go in and just like essentially create a new machine set. That's what I would do. Just go in, add the new machine set with the resources that I wanted, apply it, or scale down the old ones and scale up the new one. And that's probably my favorite part about OpenShift 4, honestly, is the machine API. It's so legit.
So I think you don't even have to create a new machine set, right? You can just edit the old machine set
you can.
and then kill all the machines, and then it will care for recreating them.
And there is a way. So one, I figured out what was going on with my dog. Somebody rang the doorbell, and they're very unhappy about it. So again, apologies if you can hear barking. But yeah, so kind of or a follow on there. So with a machine set, you can adjust the machine set, and then you can provision new nodes that'll have the new size, and you can scale the machine set down. And there is an option where it will basically to specify the order that it removes machines from. So as Jamie pointed out, if you don't want to scale to 0 to remove the old node configuration, instead you want to go from like 3 to 6, so that way you keep all that capacity, then you would set that to either delete the oldest first, or there's a label, it's either a label or annotation you can set on the nodes where it will target those specific nodes for removal when you scale down the machine set. So yeah. Supposed to work via YAML to edit on VMware. Yeah. Unfortunately, it doesn't go back and remediate those, but you can either create a new machine set or edit it and then scale up and then down. Let's see, and that also applies not just with CPU and memory, but also with like the network that it's connected to, storage devices, all that type of stuff. All right. So again, I'm checking on our notes here. So one thing I wanted to touch on is from an administrator's perspective, like building and using operators. So one of the earliest examples of this that I was introduced to, and I'll admit that I do not know the SRE teams very well. So actually came from our RHPDS team. So RHPDS is the Red Hat product demo system. In the background, or you're here in Red Hat, they're the folks that do like all of our demo environments and stuff like that. So if you've ever used OpenTLC, that's the team for that. And they had created an operator that basically always enforces quotas. So even as, they're basically spinning up clusters and handing them off to folks. And they created an operator that even if you're a cluster admin and you go in and remove the quota, it puts it right back in there and prevents you from, over consuming resources. So I thought that was a really cool use of an operator for an administrative purpose. I'm curious if there's other instances or other examples for what y'all are doing.
Yeah, so we talked about certificates, for example, right? So what I'd want to do if I'm running an OpenShift cluster is I wouldn't want to manually rotate certificates, create new certificates, and apply them. I would want to use an ACME service like Let's Encrypt. And there is an operator out there that you can use to automatically create certificates for routes. So when you create a new route and add an annotation, it will create a new certificate and apply that to your route. And actually, I try to rebuild that kind of operator as an example for an operator for an administrative purpose for the book that we wrote, because writing operators is part of how you can automate certain things. And this was just one of the good examples that came to our mind. And so we decided to take a chapter and walk through step by step developing such an operator using using the operator SDK, which is a framework that you can use to bootstrap your operator pretty quickly. So in the end, writing that operator from scratch took me only, I think, 2 or 3 days. So it was a weekend project to get that up and running. So that's really that shows how easy it is to develop an operator. I mean, it wasn't the first one, so probably got a bit used to it already. But
yeah, one thing I think it's important to point out, because the operator framework can be pretty intimidating. Most of the time we think of Go or Java-based operators, but Ansible is an option as well. So for most of us as administrators, Ansible is what we're most comfortable with, and you can absolutely use Ansible and playbooks inside of those. There was, and I'll have to dig up the link, at both Summit and KubeCon back in the 2019-2020 timeframe. I guess 2020 probably got canceled, if I remember correctly. But there was a bunch of sessions around like creating, operators from Ansible in like 5 minutes or 15 minutes or something like that. And I think there's been a number of extensions around that. I see some questions about the Slack channel. So if you go to kubernetes.slack.com and log in there, and then if you search for OpenShift users, that's the channel that it's the community channel. There's a whole bunch of folks there, including Johnny and I. Christian's in there, among many, many other folks. I see Jamie and Jamie Magira. He's usually in there, and one of the folks that I see most often. So yeah, by all means, please join Slack. You're welcome to ask us questions there, ask the community questions there. It's a really good group. And I like to think that folks usually get questions answered pretty quickly there. Slack channel, Home Lab Slack. Dwayne, I don't know if you're internal or external. There's an internal Home Lab GChat, but I don't know if there's one externally. If you do find anything, feel free to share. I'm always happy to chat about like what I do in my home lab and stuff like that.
Doesn't eventually every Slack channel become a Home Lab Slack channel at some point?
Yeah,
100%.
every channel I've ever been in is like at some point it's like, yeah, I did that in my Home Lab, and then it just expands into infinity. Oh yeah, I got a Home Lab too. Yeah, it's really big.
You have a Gmeet invite from Johnny. Please give me a demo of your home lab really quick. I need to understand.
And then the next step is like a self-help group about Raspberry Pi addiction.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah, I bet.
I see you've been, I guess not anymore because you're no longer a Red Hatter, but you were a part of all those GChat channels. Because the Home Lab community here inside of Red Hat is substantial and super active, and I love being in that channel because it's this mix of like, here's this crazy cobbled together thing that, it'll technically work, but only for my use case. And I'm basically recreating an enterprise in my basement, and everything in between. And I love it. It's my kind of chaos.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Same. I mean, it's like, and it's fine. You're very well accepted in that community. It's just as soon as you have to start to explain it to outsiders, it becomes an issue. Like, when I asked a friend to carry the 42U rack down with me into the basement, it was like, what the fuck you need that for? Like, why are we doing that to us?
Oh, that's awesome.
Let's see.
My wife is always complaining about the fans, like just the constant server noise. That she hates it.
That's why mine's upstairs where my kids' computer area is. I don't have to hear the fans. They have to hear them.
Nice.
Yeah. Sorry, I think I distracted myself here. EXERR, link the best place for creating an operator. So I talked about the operator framework itself supports Go, Java, and Ansible, but you don't have to use the operator framework. I know there's some community efforts to do things like Python-based operators and stuff like that, so you can always search for it. But officially, what you want to do, let me share my...
and I just want to correct something. Like, it's Go, Helm, and Ansible right now. I think there is a Java one, but it's like...
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's part of like the community stuff.
Thank you. You're right. So if you go to operatorframework.io, this is sort of the landing page for everything. And if you go to the documentation, you want to look for SDK documentation. And like literally, if you click this build an operator, it walks you through the whole process depending on what you're using. There's also, if you want to, again, get hands-on, if you go to that learn.OpenShift link, there used to be, I assume it's still here. There used to be a, here, operator SDK, Helm and with Go. So you can like use one of these lessons, and it will like step you through exactly the process for how to create an operator.
And it's actually really cool. The documentation is really neat, and like it's a great way to get going with operators. But also, if you want to dive deeper into Go programming, that's also a great idea there, right? Because the operator framework basically gives you all the stuff that you do not care about at the beginning, so to say, so you can focus on your operator's functionality, right? So you just go operator SDK init, and then you create an API with an X command, a controller, and then you start implementing functionality, and you can build it and run it. So like, if you really wanted extremely low functionality, you could probably write an operator in an hour if you don't write tests.
Yeah, and that's probably even learning Go as you go. So yeah, another thing that I always, not always, but I sometimes point out to folks, if you really want to get like super in depth with kind of the core functionality of OpenShift, remember it's all OLM, it's all Operator Lifecycle Manager based. So if you saw here in the documentation, there's OLM documentation, and like this whole thing will walk you through exactly like all the different parts and pieces of OLM and how they all work together, and here's all the pieces of a bundle, and here's how to create a catalog based off of that, and just tremendous amount of information here troubleshooting with Operator Lifecycle Manager. So I know some people like to get super in depth and on hands with stuff, and this upstream docs for OLM and the Operator SDK are a great place to do all of that stuff.
And on top of that, right, like when we talk about learning OpenShift and learning, the platform and everything, like this helps you understand like where things are breaking. Like as you're seeing a specific error, or as you're trying to understand like what you're doing, right? Like this helps break down like those individual components, so hey, if I'm not seeing this, that this is most likely why. So it kind of helps you put those pieces together.
Yeah, and Johnny, I'm sure you're probably familiar with this because you did a lot of disconnected installs, and usually the long pole in that tent is almost always the operator catalogs, and especially if you want to do pruning and all kinds of crazy stuff inside of there. I say crazy; it's gotten dramatically simpler recently, but you had to be pretty knowledgeable in OLM to do that before.
Oh, 100%. And shameless plug for some friends of mine. They have it's a tool. There's a tool called OC-Mirror. So it's written by some of the guys over on the Red Hat for Gov team, and it essentially makes that life easy now. So you go in, you fill out a YAML manifest, and you're able to pull down the operators that you want. And I believe it's released in 4.10, or maybe it's tech preview and it's going to be released in 4.11. It's one of those. I think it might actually be GA now. But anyways, it just, if you're running disconnected operators and you need an easy way to pull them all in, look at OC-Mirror, because it's pretty rad.
Yeah. All right, so we're approaching the end of our time. I did want to quickly cover or talk about monitoring, logging, and alerting with y'all before we jump into that topic. Just for our audience, so if you have any questions, anything that we may have missed, Johnny was very on the spot there, jumping all the way back to the beginning of chat to pull up a couple of questions. So please go ahead and submit those questions. We'll do our best to answer them before we end the stream. If we can't, or if we missed your question, please don't hesitate to reach out to us through other mechanisms. Again, Practical Andrew on Twitter, on Reddit, etc. You can also email me, andrew.sullivan. I have Raspberry Pi thoughts. I wish. We're not there yet. We can talk about that, Wayne. Feel free to reach out. And happy to have that conversation. But yeah, submit those questions. We'll do our best to address them here before we end the stream. But let's talk about monitoring, logging, and alerting. I think, and I have for a very long time, Johnny, we first worked together like 15 years ago, and you probably remember me banging the drum of alert fatigue is a real thing. Don't get alerts that aren't meaningful. Like you need to figure that out, and it should be priority number one. What do we used to call that thing? Like the purple box or something?
Oh my God. Don't do that.
I just gave you flashbacks, didn't I?
My hair's falling out in clumps now again.
So I'd love to hear your take and how you all manage that type of stuff. Like what's important, what's not important, how you configure that type of stuff.
Yeah, I think what you say is a real problem for a lot of people, and I think that includes also my current team, but also the OpenShift dedicated team. I think I'm not lying, right? So if you get too many alerts, you basically get numb for them, and then especially if you do stuff like a follow the sun rotation, it's like people don't hand over the alerts that they think are not meaningful, or I don't know what, and then in the next shift they all of a sudden become meaningful, and no one knows anything about anything. Like there's a bunch of real big issues, right? So I think the best bet that you currently have is to focus more on your services, how they perform, and what actually matters at the end of the day, right? So think of, let's take the most prominent example, like the API, the cluster API, right? So we don't really care if our disk is running full, or if we're using a lot of memory, or if our pod crash loops, or like those are all secondary issues, right? What we really actually care about is how good is our API doing? Like, are people that talk to our API receiving errors, or are the requests taking extremely super duper long, right? Those are the things that we actually care about. And those are the only things that in turn then should be critical, and then everything else basically goes one level lower, let's say a warning or even just an informational, so that when you receive that critical alert, you have supporting information that helps you with troubleshooting. So now the question is, how do I make sure that I only get actual critical alerts and not just alerts for hiccups, right? So let's say I get 2,000 requests per hour on my OpenShift API. Then one error is not an issue. Two errors probably not an issue. 2,000 errors definitely an issue. And so you need to find a line of what do you expect, and where your border is basic, right? In some cases, that is an external limit that is set. That would be your SLA, right? So OpenShift dedicated comes with an SLA out of the box model. Where is it currently? 99.9 four nines, I think. Something around that realm. Doesn't really matter, right? So, and other teams don't have that contractual agreement, then you would set yourself a service level objective instead, right? And you would say, hey, I want to achieve 99.9% of all my requests should be succeeding. And then that's already really good, right? So, and the next step from there is how to monitor best for that. And I think I don't want to take forever. So I think the best way to currently do that is multi-window, multi-burn rate alerts. There is some really good material on the internet. I think on robust perception, or if you've got the Google SRE book at home, it's also very well explained there. So the idea is basically that you burn budget of your error budget at different speeds, and that is basically of different importance. So basically, if you have a burn rate of I think 14.4% or so, you will have burned 10% of your error budget in 5 minutes. I think that's round about the mass. And so you really only get alerted if you actually burn budget. And if you get that critical alert, then you go and look at all your other warning or informational level alerts and take it from there. So I think that's really cool. And so I was extremely happy that in the monitoring team, actually in OpenShift, there's like people that are absolutely subject matter experts on this area, right? But then Fredrik Branchek was still working there, Matthias Leubel, and so you actually get multi-window, multi-burn rate alerts out of the box for the OpenShift API with every OpenShift 4 cluster. So you basically get the exact same thing that Dedicate does for that.
So Rick, when you're doing all this, right? Like when you're kind of defining these alerts and things that are important to you and your team, are you also dumping that information back out to like a Grafana dashboard or anything like that, or is it all just like alerting, just like PagerDuty, whatever, Slack?
So for me now, right, as I'm not I started to use Pura, which is a new tool that Matthias and Nadine started, and it basically helps you to visualize just service level objectives and how you're doing in terms of that. Other than that, on OpenShift, you don't get that out of the box, and the problem there is if you want to get an extra dashboard, you basically would have to figure around with the built-in Grafana or deploy additional Grafanas via the whatever means you like, right? So Grafana operator or whatever. So that makes it a little harder. So yeah.
Yeah, so for us, it's mostly alerting on error budget burn, and we use, as Rick mentioned, we use Grafana to visualize how we're doing in terms of SLO across the fleet.
I have to say, I really appreciate you reiterating and focusing on error budget as opposed to the lower level things. As you said a moment ago, Rick, of like who. Does it matter if a node is out of memory or that a single pod gets terminated, or something like that? Generally speaking, no, especially with cloud native applications. And Christian and I used to have a debate regularly about, if your pod is a single point of failure, is it really ready for Kubernetes and the type of environment, that you're deploying into? So reframing your expectations and mindsets, working with application teams to understand those things, it makes all of our lives better, right?
Yeah, I agree. But it's a journey. It's a journey, and it always depends a lot from where the company is coming from and how mature their engineering organization is, right? Like we've seen that a bunch of times that customers were trying to set pod disruption, but like limits that were just not feasible, right? Because they were basically saying, hey, we have 2 pods and none of them should ever go down. Yeah. It's like I get it, but then it takes the extra effort to go, hey, like you need to fix your application. We can't fix that for you, right? So but in general, I would say OpenShift is doing a good job of supporting you with a lot of issues because of also the general directive in the engineering organization, right? Like there's always this assumption that whatever you do, you should not be able to crash your node, right? And that's kind of where the engineering goes. And I think that's one of the key differentiators between OpenShift and vanilla Kubernetes, right? Like there it's like, oh yeah, it would be good if our node didn't crash, but it's not like, oh, if you crash our node, that's a critical bug that we have to fix like now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's awesome to see like the last, like what Andrew probably like last year and a half, there's been a huge shift towards this SRE thing, right? Or I think, like there's this big focus on DevOps and obviously like the GitOps tooling and stuff like that. But like the actual SRE and, putting that tooling and making it available for people on the clusters, I think has been, it's cool to see the evolution of it all kind of happening, right? And it's happening right in front of us. And then to take some of those really complex topics and conversations and simplify it to where it's a few clicks or a few, YAML manifests and stuff like that to actually implement, and people can have like legitimate metrics and things that matter in just a matter of seconds. I think it's amazing.
Yeah, it makes me realize how far things have progressed, and one of the reasons why I'm happy to have folks like Rick and Manuel join us, to talk about modern current practices and stuff like that for administrators, because for better or for worse, the last time I was a real practicing admin was like 5 years ago. So I'm always learning more. For application custom API monitoring, is it best practice to use Prometheus and Grafana? I don't know if it's a best practice, but that's certainly the most common. I would say the best practice is whatever one you will actually use. so long as it's there.
I think it's both, right? I think it's currently the most common tooling and also best practice, just because of how nicely Prometheus operator also works nowadays, right? So also on OpenShift, right? So you have customer monitoring, and then in turn user workload monitoring, which is all based on Prometheus operator. So I think it's best practice because it uses OpenShift or Kube native ways of discovering services, and then the endpoints in turn.
Yeah. All right. So we're well past our normal ending point at this point. So I don't want to take any more time out of your day, either our guests, Rick and Manuel, as well as our audience. So thank you both for joining us. I really appreciate you offering to join when we asked and taking the time out of your day. This has been great. I've learned a lot. We haven't looked at an OpenShift console, and sometimes those are the best days. And I feel like this is definitely one of those. Yeah, Johnny, thank you for providing that link for Dwayne for the SRE stuff, talking about burn rate and all that. So yeah, for our audience, I hope this has been useful. Please don't hesitate to send us any feedback, any questions, anything like that you happen to have. Again, you can reach me, andrew.sullivan@redhat.com, or Practical Andrew on Twitter and all the other places. I will say that sometimes I fall behind on email, so I apologize in advance if it takes me a couple of days to respond. You can also reach out to Johnny, JONNY, at redhat.com, or JRockTX1 on Twitter and all of the other places as well. So with that, if you're not watching us live, if you're watching the recording, please don't hesitate to reach out as well with any questions that you happen to have. We'll try and keep an eye on. I try and keep an eye on all of the YouTube comments. You're also welcome to comment on there if you would like. Last but not least, I will hand over to Johnny. Johnny, if you have any last words.
I just want to say thank you to Rick and Manuel for coming on. I mean, this is awesome. Hope you guys want to come back and we can talk some more nerd stuff, because I think that like this high level engineering stuff, right? It's interesting for me and Andrew, but I know it's interesting for our viewers. And sometimes we just have this question, and you guys probably answered a majority of most people. It's just like, I wonder if I could do this, or I wonder what the right answer is for this. So thanks again for coming out and taking the time to sit with us.
I mean, thanks for having us. I'd totally love to come back. Like, that'd be great.
Yeah, and if you could just let me know when you're going to be sitting out in front of the Walmart signing autographs of the book, that'd be great. So maybe we can get a picture or something like that. If you're going to be kissing and christening babies, just let me know the date. I'll try and be there.
Probably next KubeCon, I guess.
That's I wonder if we'll be handing out. Sometimes we hand out books and booths and stuff like that. That'd be a good question. It'd be a good one to pick up.
It would be.
Oh yeah, that is Manuel's mission for the rest of the year to figure out.
I'll do my best.
All right.
Okay.
Well, thank you, everybody. And we'll see you next week. Next week, we are talking about, now my mind has completely slipped me. Next week is a holiday week. So I think we'll be streaming, but I don't know what the topic is yet.
Yep, I think so too. And, Stephanie's kicking us in the shins right now, Andrew. Make sure you guys like and subscribe to videos on YouTube and Twitch. And also check out the descriptions for any of the links that, to the developer tools and to learn.openshift.com.